Hello and welcome to the Quality Control webinar that discusses the firm's risk assessment process under QC 1000. My name is David Ellum and I'm an assistant in the PCAOB Office of the Chief Auditor. Today's webinar is one in a series of webinars that address the requirements of QC 1000, the PCAOB's new standard on quality control. Changes to the quality control standards were brought about from the release of a firm's system of quality control and other amendments to PCAOB standards, rules and forms adopted by the board on May 13, 2024. The US Securities and Exchange Commission approved the PCAOB standards, rules and forms on September 9, 2024, and these will take effect on December 15, 2025. Given the intent of this webinar is to focus on only one of the components of the firm's QC system, we will not be discussing all of the nuances of the standard and related amendments. Therefore, I encourage participants to read the adopting release in order to gain a more complete understanding of the new standard and related amendments and explore the other implementation resources that have been issued to date, including a staff webinar and staff guidance documents that provide an in-depth overview of QC 1000 and guidance for firms about how to comply with the standard. All of this can be found on the PCAOB's website. Before we get started, I'll state our standard disclaimer. The views expressed are offered in my capacity as staff of the PCAOB's Office of the Chief Auditor, but they are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the board as a whole, any individual board members, or other PCAOB staff. QC 1000 describes 8 integrated components that are required to be included in a firm's design of its QC system. The firm's risk assessment process is one of 2 process components of a firm's QC system. As a reminder, the other one is monitoring and remediation. The firm's risk assessment process requires the identification and assessment of quality risks annually and applies to the 6 non-process components that address aspects of the firm's organization and operations, which are circled on this slide. These are governance and leadership, ethics and independence, acceptance and continuance of engagements, engagement performance, resources, and information and communication. The firm's risk assessment process is the basis for a risk-based approach to the design, implementation, and operation of the firm's QC system. In combination with the monitoring and remediation process, it creates a feedback loop to drive continuous improvement of the firm's QC system. Applying a risk-based approach to the design, implementation, and operation of the QC system will prompt firms to identify and focus on the most relevant risks to quality in the context of their own practice and will make QC 1000 appropriately adaptable to future changes in technology, regulation, and the business environment. It will also ensure scalability, allowing firms to right-size their QC systems as their practices grow and change. The risk assessment process consists of establishing quality objectives, identifying and assessing quality risks to the achievement of the quality objectives, and designing and implementing quality responses to address those quality risks. Firms are required to take proactive measures to address new quality risks that may come up between the firm's annual risk assessments by modifying its quality objectives, quality risks, and quality responses as necessary. Under the standard, firms are required to implement and operate an effective QC system, that is, comply with all provisions of QC 1000 at all times that the firm is required to comply with applicable professional and legal requirements with respect to any of the firm's engagements. For any time that a firm is not required to implement and operate an effective QC system, this standard will apply to the firm only in regard to the design of the QC system, based on the quality risks the firm likely would face if it were to perform engagements as defined in paragraph A3 of QC 1000. This includes the requirements related to the firm's risk assessment process. Therefore, the risk assessment process for a firm that is not required to implement and operate an effective QC system would include establishing quality objectives, annually identifying and assessing quality risks that the firm likely would face if it were to perform engagements, and designing quality responses to address those risks. We'll talk about each of the steps shown on this slide in more detail. QC 1000 requires all firms to establish quality objectives. These are defined in the standard as the desired outcomes in relation to the components of the QC system to be achieved by the firm. In order to set up our discussion of quality objectives, let's first take a step back and talk about the overall objective of the firm, which is to design and, if applicable, implement and operate an effective QC system. An effective QC system consistently provides a firm with reasonable assurance that A, the firm, each member of firm personnel, and each other participant conduct each of the firm's engagements in accordance with applicable professional and legal requirements and fulfill their other responsibilities that are part of or subject to the firm's QC system in accordance with applicable professional and legal requirements. And B, each engagement report issued by the firm is in accordance with applicable professional and legal requirements. This is referred to as the reasonable assurance objective. As a reminder, reasonable assurance is not absolute assurance, but it is a high level of assurance. QC 1000 establishes a mandatory minimum set of outcome-based quality objectives that apply to all firms. These quality objectives are specified in the standard for 6 of the components of the QC system. The standard does not require the firm to establish quality objectives for the monitoring and remediation process. However, a firm may decide to, and in those circumstances, the firm's risk assessment process would also apply to the monitoring and remediation process. Otherwise, although monitoring and remediation would not be subject to the firm's risk assessment process as described in the standard, it would nevertheless be carried out in a way that is informed by and responsive to quality risks. Firms can establish additional quality objectives. Indeed, they are required to do so if necessary to achieve the objective of the QC system, but they generally cannot omit or modify any of the quality objectives set out in the standard. The board stated in the adopting release that for many firms, the quality objectives specified in the standard are likely to be comprehensive, and we do not expect in our current environment that additional quality objectives would generally be necessary. However, we also recognize that the nature and circumstances of a firm and its engagements will vary and the environment may change. Accordingly, firms are required to establish additional quality objectives if necessary. Said another way, the quality objectives established by the standard set forth a floor rather than a ceiling that all firms must establish. However, the standard recognizes that some quality objectives apply only in specific circumstances. These objectives need to be achieved by the firm if the specific circumstances apply. For example, if the firm belongs to a network or if the firm uses other participants. Finally, if a firm determines that its quality objectives need to be more specific, it could establish sub-objectives to provide a more direct link to quality risks and support the development of more comprehensive or better targeted responses. This may be helpful in situations where there are multiple processes within a component, and the firm determines that assigning sub-objectives to specific individuals will emphasize their responsibility and accountability as part of meeting the overall quality objective. For example, as it relates to the hiring, development, and retention of firm personnel that have the competence to perform activities and carry out responsibilities for the operation of the firm's QC system and the performance of the firm's engagements, the firm might want to establish sub-objectives in addition to the quality objective that are each specific to the hiring, the development, or the retention of such firm personnel. Next, we're going to talk about how firms identify and assess quality risks to achieving the quality objectives established by the firm. Under QC 1000, quality risks are defined as those risks, whether or not related to intentional acts by firm personnel or other participants to deceive or to violate applicable professional and legal requirements, that individually or in combination with other risks have a reasonable possibility of occurring and if they were to occur, a reasonable possibility of adversely affecting the firm's achievement of one or more quality objectives. As part of identifying and assessing quality risks, QC 1000 requires a firm to obtain an understanding of the conditions, events, and activities that may adversely affect the achievement of the firm's quality objectives, which includes an understanding of 1, the nature and circumstances of the firm, 2, the nature and circumstances of the firm's engagements, and 3, other relevant information. This understanding underpins the firm's identification and assessment of the quality risks that are relevant to the achievement of the firm's quality objectives. Quality risks are specific to the firm and the engagements it performs. Therefore, the standard does not specify quality risks that must be assessed and responded to by all firms. Instead, it includes a list of considerations related to the nature and circumstances of the firm and its engagements and other relevant information for the firm to consider in its risk assessment process. Because quality risks are specific to the firm and the engagements it performs, identifying quality risks that are in inverse to the quality objective generally would not be specific to a firm and its engagements, and may result in a firm designing quality responses that are not effective in achieving the quality objective, therefore increasing the risk of non-compliance with the standard. For example, take the quality objective specified in paragraph 31C of QC 1000 related to ethics and independence. That is, violations are communicated on a timely basis to the individual assigned operational responsibility for the firm's compliance with ethics and independence requirements. If a firm with a complex organizational structure were to identify and assess the related quality risks simply as the risk that violations are not communicated on a timely basis to the individual assigned operational responsibility for the firm's compliance with ethics and independence requirements, then this may not contemplate the specific facts and circumstances of the firm that could drive the quality objective being adversely affected. The more precise that a firm is when identifying and assessing quality risks, the more likely the effective the design of quality responses and ultimately the achievement of the quality objective will be. In order to assist firms in identifying and assessing quality risks that are specific to their firm, Appendix B of QC 1000 provides examples related to the nature and circumstances of the firm and its engagements that may give rise to quality risks. This list of considerations included in Appendix B and in the standard is not intended to be exhaustive, and the specific examples are meant to be illustrative rather than a checklist for every firm to consider. Whether a particular consideration is relevant and results in one or more quality risks depends upon the nature and circumstances of the firm and its engagements and how the conditions, events, and activities relate to or affect the operation of the firm's QC system and the performance of its engagements. For example, Appendix B includes examples of considerations related to the firm's business processes and strategic and operational decisions. These include pressure to meet financial targets and commercial goals. And if this is a consideration existing in a firm, this could create quality risk related to firm personnel not having the time to perform engagements in accordance with applicable professional and legal requirements. There's also an example in Appendix B related to mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. And if there was a merger or acquisition within a firm, this could impact many different quality objectives of the firm's QC system, including but not limited to those related to the ethics and independence components, the acceptance and continuance of engagements, and the resources of the firm, including the firm's policies and procedures, methodologies, and standardized documentation templates. As another example, Appendix B also includes examples of conditions related to the nature and circumstances of the firm's engagements. These include the complexity of technology used by the company under audit and by the firm when performing engagements. If the firm's engagements rely on complex technology, then this could create quality risks related to the training and assigning of firm personnel who have the competence to use the technology when carrying out their responsibilities. There's also an example in Appendix B related to the extent of the firm's and its personnel's experience with the relevant types of engagements. And if the firm identified that it had taken on a new engagement in an industry that the firm had not audited before, this could create quality risks related to whether the firm has the appropriate resources to perform the engagement, including the assignment of people and development of industry-specific methodologies or practice aids. Okay, Appendix B is not intended to be exhaustive, and the firm may also identify quality risks that do not relate to the list of considerations or to any of the specific examples included in Appendix B of QC 1000. So let's talk through a more detailed example of how a firm might apply Appendix B to identify a quality risk. In this scenario, as part of understanding the characteristics and management styles of leadership, which it is required to do under QC 1000, paragraph 20A1C, the firm identifies that it has highly distributed management authority, particularly for the size of the firm, because its firm leadership are spread out across many different locations and industry groups, and there is no clearly defined HQ or national office function. The firm considers that there may be a risk resulting from this, that there are unclear lines of responsibility within the firm. Next, the firm needs to determine whether this risk could give rise to a quality risk as defined in QC 1000. We'll cover how to do this in the next couple of slides. As a reminder, when identifying and assessing quality risks as defined in QC 1000, the firm would not be required to identify every conceivable risk, but only those that have a reasonable possibility of occurring, and if they were to occur, a reasonable possibility of adversely affecting the firm's achievement of one or more quality objectives. The decision tree on the left of the slide, which can also be found on page 105 of the adopting release, illustrates the decision points that need to be answered when making the determination of whether a risk is a quality risk. To further illustrate this, we'll continue with our example from the previous slide, whereby a firm determined that its management authority was highly distributed. The firm determines that there is a risk of having unclear lines of responsibility within the firm and among firm leadership because of the highly distributed management authority, which could create uncertainty within the firm regarding escalation and communication protocols. The firm determines that if this risk were to occur, it would have a reasonable possibility of adversely affecting the quality objective that is specified in paragraph 31C of QC 1000, which is that violations are communicated on a timely basis to the individual assigned operational responsibility for the firm's compliance with ethics and independence requirements. The firm further determines that this risk does have a reasonable possibility of occurring due to the high distribution of management authority and there being no central national office function for handling potential ethics and independence violations. Therefore, the firm identifies a quality risk that unclear escalation and communication protocols within the firm and among firm leadership cause ethics and independence violations to not be timely communicated to the individual assigned operational responsibility for the firm's compliance with ethics and independence requirements. And so, as a result of using the example considerations within Appendix B, the firm has identified a quality risk. I would like to reiterate that we walked through a very specific and narrow example, and just because a certain condition, event, or activity exists within a firm or its engagements, this does not automatically lead to the existence of a certain quality risk. Whether a particular example is relevant, whether it results in one or more quality risks, or how it affects the assessment of quality risks will depend upon the nature and circumstances of the firm and its engagements. For identified quality risks, the firm would also need to assess the quality risk, which can be done concurrently with the quality risk identification, or could be done as a separate discrete step. Assessing the identified quality risks involves consideration of the frequency with which the quality risks may occur and the magnitude of the impact of the quality risks on the related quality objective. This assessment is based on inherent risk, i.e., without regard to the effect of any related quality responses. Before we move into discussing quality responses in more detail, I want to briefly highlight an important point within this decision tree. That is that the firm's identification and assessment of quality risks takes into account individual risks as well as combinations of risks. This is because a risk that has a reasonable possibility of occurring, but individually does not have a reasonable possibility of adversely affecting the achievement of a quality objective, may have a reasonable possibility of adversely affecting the achievement of a quality objective when combined with other risks, thus meeting the definition of a quality risk. For example, suppose a firm, when obtaining an understanding of the conditions, events, and activities that may adversely affect the achievement of its quality objectives, identifies that it has significantly reduced its training budget year over year. As a result, the firm identifies a risk that its firm personnel may receive insufficient training. The firm then determines whether this risk is a quality risk related to the achievement of the quality objective in paragraph 44A of QC 1000, which is that firm personnel are hired, developed, and retained who have the competence to perform activities and carry out responsibilities for the operation of the firm's QC system and the performance of the firm's engagements in accordance with applicable professional and legal requirements and the firm's policies and procedures. A further understanding of the nature and circumstances of the firm, its engagements, and other relevant information reveals that the firm's engagement portfolio remains consistent year over year, and there have been no changes in the regulatory environment that the firm believes would impact the required knowledge, skill, or ability of firm personnel to appropriately perform activities and carry out their responsibilities. As such, the firm concludes that the risk does not have a reasonable possibility of adversely affecting the achievement of the quality objective, or would not give rise to a quality risk alone. However, the firm cannot consider each risk solely in isolation, and instead also has to evaluate whether risks combine to have a reasonable possibility of adversely affecting the achievement of the quality objective. Say, for example, the firm has also identified a risk related to high staff turnover within the firm's audit practice. In this scenario, the firm might conclude that even though the firm's engagement portfolio and regulatory environment has remained consistent year over year, a significant reduction in the annual training budget may give rise to a quality risk when combined with a risk of high staff turnover due to a need to invest in the training of newly hired staff to replace those that leave. Similarly, the firm may roll out periodic updates to their audit methodology. If there are updates to the firm's audit methodology, a quality risk related to the methodology updates not being properly understood and applied by firm personnel may arise when combined with the risk that firm personnel are not adequately trained because of the reduction in the firm's training budget. Next, the firm would need to design and implement quality responses that address quality risks in order to achieve the quality objectives. The correspondence across quality objectives, quality risks, and quality responses is generally not one-to-one. Most quality objectives are likely to have multiple quality risks. Some quality risks may affect one or more quality objectives, either within a single component or across several components, and may require multiple quality responses. Some quality responses may address multiple quality risks across multiple components of the firm's QC system. Quality responses are defined in Appendix A of QC 1000 as policies and procedures designed and implemented by the firm to address quality risks. Policies are statements of what should or should not be done to address and assess quality risk, and procedures are actions to implement and comply with policies. In addition to the quality responses that firms design on their own through the risk assessment process, QC 1000 also includes specified quality responses. Specified quality responses are specific policies and procedures that are mandatory for the firms to which they apply. In some cases, all firms, and in other cases, only firms with larger PCAOB audit practices. Specified quality responses are not intended to be comprehensive, and alone will not be sufficient to enable the firm to achieve all established quality objectives of the firm's QC system. Under the standard, the firm must design and implement quality responses that, 1, are based on the quality risks and the reasons for the assessments given to the quality risks, and 2, reduce to an appropriately low level the risk that the quality objective will not be achieved. Consistent with the principles-based approach of the standard, the nature, timing, and extent of quality responses depend on the underlying quality risks and the reasons why these risks were assessed as quality risks. For example, a quality risk that is tied to an event that is expected to occur multiple times per year, or that could have a very significant impact, requires a more extensive response than a quality risk tied to a specific event that is expected to occur only once and have a less significant impact. Let's consider how a firm might design and implement quality responses in our example from earlier. Up to this point, the firm has identified and assessed a quality risk that unclear escalation and communication protocols within the firm cause ethics and independence violations to not be timely communicated to the individual assigned operational responsibility for the firm's compliance with ethics and independence requirements. The firm considers the specified quality response that is required in the standard pursuant to paragraph 27, which is that the firm should establish and maintain clear lines of responsibility and supervision within the QC system, including defining authorities, responsibilities, accountabilities, and supervisory and reporting lines for roles within the firm, up to and including the principal executive officer or equivalent. In considering whether the specified quality response appropriately addresses the quality risk, the firm determines that this would not sufficiently address it alone because this is not specific enough to the quality risk identified. In order to address the quality risk, the firm determines it necessary to design and implement an additional quality response that establishes escalation and communication protocols specifically for independence and ethics violations. This might include, for example, establishing a process or thresholds to assign severity ratings to violations that would determine how and when the violations are communicated to the individual assigned operational responsibility for the firm's compliance with ethics and independence requirements. As another example, this might include establishing an ethics and independence mailbox or hotline within the firm through which all violations must be reported and reviewed by the individual assigned operational responsibility for the firm's compliance with ethics and independence requirements. The firm determines that implementing a quality response that establishes escalation and communication protocols specifically for independence and ethics violations, together with the specified quality response regarding establishing clear lines of responsibility, would, in combination, reduce to an appropriately low level the risk that the quality objective will not be achieved. As a general point, the firm may decide to implement quality responses at the firm level or the engagement level, or through a combination of responses at the firm and engagement levels, depending on the nature of the quality risk. For example, a firm may determine to implement quality responses at the firm level and the engagement level to address risks of non-compliance with independence requirements. At the firm level, a firm may implement an annual independence confirmation for all firm personnel. In addition, the firm may identify a specific quality risk for engagements in the financial services industry due to a perceived increased likelihood of financial relationships between the company and individuals subject to the independence requirements. As a result, the firm may implement an additional, more specific independence confirmation for those individuals that work on engagements in the financial services industry. The firm's risk assessment process is iterative and ongoing, so that new or developing risks are identified and addressed as they emerge. Firms do not necessarily need to address the requirements of the risk assessment process in a linear manner. For example, in identifying and assessing quality risks, the firm may determine that one or more additional quality objectives are required. Or in designing and implementing quality responses, the firm may identify additional quality risks. Subsequent to performing an annual risk assessment, there are a number of ways that the firm may become aware of changes to conditions events, or activities that indicate that modifications to the quality objectives, quality risks, or quality responses may be needed. For example, there may be changes internal to the firm, such as a merger or acquisition, or the firm may accept an engagement for an audit of a company that is in a new industry for the firm. Similarly, changes in the firm's external environment may be relevant to the firm's risk assessment, such as changes in the applicable professional and legal requirements that are relevant to the firm. Consistent with this, QC 1000 requires firms to take proactive measures to address new quality risks that may come up between the firm's annual risk assessments by modifying its quality objectives, quality risks, and quality responses as necessary. The firm should establish policies and procedures to monitor, identify, and assess changes to conditions, events, and activities that indicate modifications to the firm's quality objectives, quality risks, or quality responses may be needed. Such policies and procedures should specify that the firm take into account, among other sources, information from the firm's monitoring and remediation process. Policies and procedures that are forward-looking and designed to respond to dynamic changes in the environment will better enable the firm to anticipate and plan for significant changes. The timing for any modification depends on the nature and extent of the modification needed. In some circumstances, immediate action may be required, whereas in other cases, if the impact on risk is less urgent, immediate action may not be necessary. Modifications not implemented in a timely manner may fail to prevent quality risks from occurring and adversely affecting the quality objective. As an example, the firm may implement policies and procedures to monitor for changes in the external environment affecting the firm's engagements. The firm may identify that certain companies under audit would be sensitive to changes in the interest rate environment, and the firm determines that if rates were to rise, then there would be increased audit risk related to valuation and classification of investment securities held by those companies. If interest rates were to rise, then in response, the firm might modify its risk assessment and determine that it is appropriate to increase the number of in-process and completed engagements in the financial services industry over which it performs monitoring activities. As another example, the firm may implement policies and procedures to monitor for changes in the firm's structure or affiliations during the period. If during the period the firm were to become a member of a network, then the firm would need to modify its risk assessment to address the various aspects of QC 1000 that address the nature and extent of the relationship between the firm and the network. For example, ensuring that information is communicated to or obtained from the network to enable the operation of the firm's QC system and the performance of its engagements in accordance with applicable professional and legal requirements. Let's take a closer look at the QC 1000 timeline. The new standard and related amendments will become effective on December 15, 2025. This means that a firm's QC system needs to be designed and implemented by December 15, 2025, and a firm will need to be ready to start operating it from that date onwards in accordance with QC 1000. As it relates to the firm's risk assessment process, by December 15, 2025, firms need to have established quality objectives, identified and assessed their firm-specific quality risks, and designed and implemented quality responses to address those quality risks, including designing and implementing specified quality responses. And then from December 15, 2025 onwards, the firm will need to operate those quality responses. Let's briefly discuss an example. For firms with a larger PCAOB audit practice, QC 1000 paragraph 34A1 requires that the firm automates the process for identifying investments in security holdings that might impair the independence of the firm or certain firm personnel. By the December 15, 2025 effective date, the firm would need to have designed and implemented this process. So, for example, if the firm plans to utilize a new system to facilitate this process, then the firm might decide to design and build the system in-house, in which case the system would need to be ready to go live by the December 15th, 2025 effective date. And then from December 15th, 2025 onwards, that system would need to be operating as part of the firm's QC system. To emphasize, in our view, there are parts of the risk assessment process that firms need to be performing before the effective date. Indeed, we have observed from our firm outreach activities that a number of firms have already commenced their QC 1000 risk assessment process. And firms will be able to leverage work already performed as part of implementing other quality control standards that apply to the firm. However, given the incremental requirements within QC 1000, the quality risks and responses identified as part of the firm's risk assessment process under those standards would not be sufficient to meet the requirements of QC 1000. As stated in the adopting release, being proactive in the risk assessment process should result in better, more tailored quality risks and quality responses, which should drive better compliance with the standard. Before we wrap up today's webinar, I just wanted to remind everyone of our QC implementation webpage located on the PCAOB's website. We continue to update it as we develop additional implementation resources. These include a staff presentation of an overview of QC 1000, as well as staff guidance documents covering aspects of QC 1000 and the related amendments to AS 2901. The QC implementation webpage also includes a phone number and form for contacting the PCAOB regarding standards-related inquiries. If you subscribe to PCAOB News, you should get a notification when the page is updated with new resources. For more information on the standard and related amendments, please also see PCAOB release number 2024-005 on the PCAOB's website. Thank you for listening.